All right, I think we're about at that noon mark. I got Tony on the line as well. Looks like the attendee rooms is filling up slowly but surely. Maybe give a couple seconds here. I see there's a few questions within the chat. I'm going to address these and then we can get started. All right. So without further ado, let's get things kicked off. Thank you everyone for jumping on. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are in the world. Hopefully you're staying safe and staying active. But for today's session, we're going to be diving into the rise of SecDevOps. And before we do that, maybe getting some introductions of who's going to be speaking to you today. I'll start with myself. Hi guys, my name is Daniel Tarani. I'm an account manager here at Magento. I come from a pretty extensive background in the DevOps space and startups in general. I worked for Tegile and then most recently HashiCorp and Platform 9. But before I came on board at Magento, I was doing a lot of DevOps consulting for Fortune 500 companies, really focused on banks and fintechs and so on and so forth. So I've been on both sides of the ball, and I'm happy to say Magento has been a great fit for me, and excited to share a little bit about our story, but more importantly about the overarching theme and some of the industry trends that we're seeing. And on the call with me today, I have my colleague, Tony Chong. Tony is, well, I guess his official title here is Solutions Architect. Hey, Tony. But he's a man of many hats. And first and foremost, he's one of our engineering leaders, phenomenal OPA expert. But before, in his previous life, you know, Tony, I think you've done it all. You've been a practitioner, you've been leadership, you've founded your own company. You've worked with with these technologies, and I think you've dealt with a lot of the themes we're going to be talking about on the practitioner side, and now you're kind of on the vendor side. So you definitely got a unique perspective, and we're excited to hear it. But before we pass the ball on off to you, I'd like to kind of share, folks, some of the topics we're going to be talking about. Of course, the overarching theme is the rise of SecDevOps, but kind of double clicking into what we're going to be exploring. Number one, it's the shift in culture that we're seeing, right? I think Tony will hit on this, but just like 5 or 6 years ago, we saw DevOps really gaining traction. We're seeing much of the similar storm being brewed now with DevSecops. And then shout out to all our marketing departments. You know, what they did with the cloud about 8, 9 years ago, I think they're doing it now with DevSecops and SecDevOps. There is a distinction. So what does it really mean? We're going to be diving into that. But the overarching theme is going to be the continued agility, right? It's the fact that we're trying to be proactive and not reactive. And I think this is where that quote unquote shift left movement is being born from. And then lastly, 2021 predictions. No COVID predictions from us. Don't worry about that. We're going to be diving into what we feel are kind of the leading industry trends and what a lot of organizations are going to be doubling down on as we progress further in the new year. So without further ado, Tony, if you're out there, I'd like to kind of give you the ball and please take us the rest of the way through here.
Right on, Dan. Here we go. All right, so when it comes to securing your cloud native applications, I think the big question on the table here is who owns it? Now, whether you are just starting out in your cloud native journey or you're now tasked to secure your entire infrastructure, I think you're going to come to a point where you're going to ask this question: who owns it? Whether it's from a, configuring your new microservice or battling a security related incident, who's going to take care of this? And so a survey conducted by the IDC last year of 300 CISOs, they stated that 2/3 of live site incidents are caused by somebody has to take care of, right? And so, you know, this is madness. Yeah, this is SecDevOps. And so organizations are at a crossroads now, right? They want to move fast. They want to take advantage of DevOps and all this agility, but you know, not everyone is up to speed, right? And for those who are already tackling this security effort in their cloud native environment, we see a joint effort from these three technical stakeholders, right? And it only makes sense, right? Because as developers own more of their Kubernetes configuration, that's cool, but they're not necessarily the hardcore Kubernetes administrators or experts, right? Then on the other side of the partnership, you have the ops team, which, you know, we're security oriented, but you know, I'm not a security expert in the regard that a security person is. Like, I don't, like, when it comes to cryptography, I may not be the best to speak on it, but you know, the security teams are, right? But the challenge here is they haven't been part of this DevOps conversation. And so what organizations are doing, they're understanding that it takes all three of these teams to come together and piggyback off of this DevOps formula, right? Because, you know, if you think about what DevOps is, it's all about collaborating to solve the hard problems, right? Moving fast. And so, sure, right? The three teams get together, but then what? How do they do it, right? And so I equate a lot of this, this SecDevOps and this policy as code movement to, you know, infrastructure as code in the early days of what's now known as DevOps, right? In the early days of DevOps, you know, I remember having to do Agile. We were sprinting in 2008, and you know, our 1U servers are on back order, and the technical project manager is saying, "Well, how many points is that?" Well, I don't know. 3 points for 6 weeks of back order. That doesn't really make sense, right? But when infrastructure as code came out, I was then able to point appropriately and speak the same language as my counterparts on the development side, right? That we were all part of the same project team, right? And so what policy is code, security is code, governance is code, really codifying these standards is doing for security what it, in this SecDevOps, what infrastructure as code has done for ops teams, right? And because now these things are codified, you can implement them into your SDLC workflows, right? Your CI/CD tools, build time, deploy time, and then runtime, right? And then so because it's security, because it's a 24/7 thing, it's not just a one and done thing, right? There's new vulnerabilities constantly being discovered that you have to look into and patch and secure. And so we use analytics and reporting to gain more visibility to start answering the real questions, right? When it comes to security. Are we compliant? Are we secure? For how long? And so the big takeaway from these three pillars is that security, in order to accomplish all of these things, you know, be secure, move fast, security has to shift left, right? And we'll get more into that in some of the upcoming slides. Right? And so, you know, taking a step back, we think about this, this nomenclature, right? There's like DevOps, DevSecops, SecDevOps, you know, what's in a name? And so, you know, these are my definitions. You'll probably see some variants in the internet, right? But to me, DevOps is like your day one initiatives, right? This is when you figure out the shift in culture, you know, how Dev and Ops work together, and you know, it's culture change, understanding technology. You're just getting your feet wet, but there's really no thought here about security from a technology perspective and a team perspective, right? It's just the Dev and Ops, right, in a team trying to push code. You know, for DevSecops, to me, in a more mature DevOps environment, you know, you start getting into this no-ops situation, right? Where, you know, the DevOps, you know, the ops team has provided this layer of abstraction for the developers so they could just interface with some tooling and they can push their own code and manage their own microservices. And so this gives the ops team an opportunity to focus on security But ironically, again, security is kind of, has been thought afterwards, right? And now we're in the stage of SecDevOps, where I look at this from two different perspectives, right? The first perspective is we are involving security teams, right? It's no longer dev and ops. And at first it was devs throwing the grenade over the wall for ops to manage. And then that never worked because there was constant battle. And then what's happening now, it's, devs throwing a grenade over the wall for security. And then they have to figure it out. And then there's like this weird loop, right? Where instead of just moving left to right as fast as we can, there's this challenge, right? And I'll get into that in just a second. And the second perspective here is not just involving the security teams, but also treating security as a priority. And what I mean by that is, that's incorporated now into your development, your architecture meetings, your design, time, accounting, budget, right? You're adding that to your checklist of things that you have to do in order to push software out to production. And so just to recap what I was talking about, right? Before, after bare metal went to the VMs and then VMs went to the cloud, infrastructure as code, really put ops teams and dev teams, on the same communication. Now the ops team has a chance to think about security in a way, but it's not enough, right? And so now we're in the days where ransomware attacks are prevalent, right? Crypto mining bots get snuck in there. You don't know what's going on. It all comes back to who's responsible. So now we're in the days of SecDevOps, where you have to include your security team in the conversation. And so, let's take a real world example, right? This is just a very general, high-level overview. Your environment may look a little bit different than this, but it's the same components, right? On the left, we have a developer. They check in their code to their source code repository. The CI/CD solution picks that up, does its thing, and at some point in this pipeline, this goes into the queue of security, where they need to analyze, the code dependencies, the images, are you using, the networking rules, everything that goes into configuring your microservice, and that goes into a queue, right? And so by the time, at least in my experience, by the time the developer is waiting for this response, they're kind of on to the next thing. And so when security calls back to them, they're already thinking about something else, right? And so that context switching costs a lot, right? It's more than just monetary, right? It's just the amount of mentality switch you have to have. It's hard, right? And so, I've even heard this out loud, right? Security is a blocker, right? And that kind of goes against the idea of DevOps, right? Which is about moving fast, right? And so in the SecDevOps world, because policies is code, we can now inject this at every stage of the SDLC, right? So even before the developer commits to their local, their local version of the code, they can run the tooling to identify whether or not they have even problems before it even gets committed, right? And that same policy traverses through the stack, right? It applies at CI/CD. It applies at deploy time, right? If the developer decides that they want to bypass the system, and product says that, I've heard this before too, when it comes to pushing production code or security, I don't care about security. I've literally have heard this more than one time, right? And so if a developer feels pressure and they decide to bypass the process, well, the same policy that they're bypassing gets enforced at deploy time. And then because vulnerabilities aren't something that, it's one and done, they're constantly being discovered, you want to check those things at your runtime as well, and those same policies apply. So it's, again, this is reusable stuff, right? And so, before I jump into kind of, and then what, let's do a quick recap, because I know we're moving fast and there's a lot of information here. And so what do we have, right? We have a bunch of pieces of the puzzle, right? We have all these components, right? Code dependencies, YAMLs, networking rules, service accounts, role-based asset control. We have all these components. And then we have a variety of technical stakeholders, right? Security, dev, and ops, that bring a different perspective and skill sets to the table all needing to come together, right, to build a solution, secure and scalable solution. And then you have policy as code, right, that glues it all together and gets incorporated into each phase of your SDLC pipeline, right? And that's a lot, right? That's skill shift, culture shift. It's a different paradigm. It's getting people to talk who really don't talk, right, on a day-to-day basis. You know, what do you do, right? It's like, it's overwhelming. It's catatonic, right? You're just stuck and like, I don't know what to do. And so one thing that I have seen is we can reuse this DevOps formula, right? The way that we got to DevOps, this formula of collaboration, you know, we can reuse the same ideas and the same methodology to get SecDevOps live in your environment. And so first off, identify the champions, right? We have stakeholders here crossed out because a lot of times stakeholders can be, you know, product owners, directors, VPs. Don't get me wrong, right? They need to have buy-in, and it certainly helps when it comes from the top down, but that doesn't solve the challenge of actually getting it done, right? It's more like we have to get it done, but how do we get it done, right? And so when I talk about champions here, I'm talking about the folks in your organization that knows all about this stuff. Those are the people that get things done. When you have a question about anything, you go to them and they know what's up, right? Get them involved. Those are your champions. They're gonna be thrilled, right? They're gonna be thrilled to lead these initiatives, not because it's their job, but because they're passionate about doing the right thing. DevOps, when we first were doing DevOps, you know, there was a lot of bad blood, right, between devs and ops, right? Especially when it came to, you know, after-hours support. And so, you know, expect there's going to be technical challenges because, again, there's a lot of different people involved that have different skill sets. You know, Kubernetes may not be the forte of the developer, and like Diffie-Hellman, which is, you know, a cryptography algorithm, right? It may not be something that a DevOps engineer can speak upon, right? So expect there's going to be, you know, these cultural challenges because, you know what, we're human beings and, you know, we're opinionated and we're finicky, right? And so just expect that, but focus, keep your eyes on the prize and focus on what's at hand, which is solving, you know, this challenge of how do we be secure in a fast moving environment, right? That's the goal. And then ultimately, I cannot stress this enough, get started, right? Don't be in meetings, don't talk about what ifs, and then, you know, iterate on the what ifs. You're iterating on details that haven't even been validated, right? You don't even know if they're meaningful. The only way to really know what's going on is by getting started, right? Not everyone's gonna go through the same thing because everyone is, you know, every team is different, every person is different. You're gonna run through similar things. You'll have your own version of these stories, but, you know, those stories are to be made, right? And the only way you're gonna make those stories is by putting that first foot forward and getting started. And then, so again, I'll recap real quick, because again, it's a lot of information, right? We now have SecDevOps, we have security in our workflows, we have the visibility, we have everything going for us. We have a entire team, but let's go back to this original question, right? Who owns it? And, you know, as corny as this sounds, you know, all of us own it, right? Because let's think about it for a second. At the end of the day, a hacker, right? A hacker, or even the CEO, they don't care that it was Tony's job to prevent containers from running as root. They don't care that it was Sally's job to plug port 22, TCP 22, right? From the from ingress, right? Or even your own ego. It doesn't matter, right? What matters is that you prevent these exploits from happening in the first place, right? And reacting as quickly as possible, right? If you can't do that. And so ultimately, whether you're just starting out on your DevOps journey, or, you know, all of this stuff is like super familiar to you, you know, like the back of your hand, you know, some things that I think about moving forward here in 2021 and some trends you're going to see is that machine learning is going to play a big role in security, right? If you think about the old school intrusion detection prevention systems, they had anomaly detection, right? Today it's a web application firewall, right? Historics and metrics play a role into figuring out, what's next, or have we seen this before? How many times have we seen it? And if it's the same thing you're seeing over and over again, you can automate a solution, right? Ultimately, then once you have the solution, you can prevent it from happening again in anything new that you develop, right? Because that's a new baseline. And then ultimately, what's going to happen is as more and more organizations face this challenge of securing their cloud native infrastructure and application, these patterns that I've discussed here, they're going to become widely available, right? People are going to start adopting patterns because, pretty much people are using cloud native, open source tools, right? A lot of us are, Prometheus, Grafana, those things, those have become the norm, right? Essentially over the last couple of years. And I think these patterns that we're talking about are going to start emerging and they're going to become widely accepted as well. And so with that said, that's it for the demo in terms of the technical side. And so we're definitely going to have time for Q&A. I know we rushed through this pretty fast. There's a lot of content. But first, we're going to talk Dan's going to talk a little bit about Magento and where we fit into the SecDevOps picture. And then we're definitely going to open it up for Q&A. So Dan, take it away.
Thanks, Tone. Thanks for diving into that, right? I think we can all agree we're into an interesting period where organizations are starting to feel the friction, and even us team members, we're starting to feel a little friction as well. But how does Magento tie into kind of the content we just presented and our role in this shift left? And I think it's a three-tier problem, as Tony had discussed before, and we built our organization to try to answer these three tiers. So Magento is a SaaS product, and we work on top of all clouds. We're agnostic. But number one, we focus on policies. And we try to enable organizations to get going as soon as possible, right? So we take out kind of the heavy lifting when it comes to OPA, which is what we're built off of, Open Policy Agent. And we own that for you, right? So you can become a consumer and focus on your day-to-day job. We also do our best to have an extensible policy library, which that way, working with our customers in banking and fintech and medtech, right? We see a lot of common policies and we want to make those available. So again, you guys can get going as soon as possible. Out of the box audit checks, again, the idea is to move from reactive security to proactive security and being on top of it. And then also taking that developer first mindset. I think this is incredibly crucial because there's more than a handful of companies that are going to be speaking the story, but how many of them are going to stick to the principles that are important to you? And I think when you look at it and you look at the way our organization is built and the way our product is designed, we maniacally focus on being open, integrated, and visible. Now, shifting paces here, we look at our workflows. I won't get into a customer story. Hopefully, he'll be on a podcast here soon with us or a campfire chat. But essentially, there's an organization, they spent a whole bunch of money on a bright, shiny new toy only to realize after the security had bought it, that it does not integrate into any of their current pipeline at all. So it's just been sitting there for 6-7 months, and it's completely useless to them, right? Here at Magento, we're not here to tell you what tools you should use. Our goal is to make sure that we play well with your environment, so that way we're complementary, no matter where we are in your organization or where you are in your life cycle development cycle as well. We want to be as agnostic as possible. And you can see that highlighted with our integration with third-party tools on our website. And also being multi-cloud. I think this is incredibly important as organizations, whether that's financially or just from a pure strategy standpoint, they want to go multi-cloud and they're expanding their infrastructure footprint, is having a repeatable and reliable way to write once and enforce anywhere, right? I think that's the ultimate dream. And then lastly, and I think this is the most key element to what we're doing at Magento is analytics. Whether our relationships are from a business standpoint or a personal standpoint, usually the key ingredient to having a successful one is transparency. And how do we do that, right? By creating visibility through analytics, creating trust within the organizations. Back to what Tony was saying, we have 3 people who traditionally maybe didn't talk to each other all that much before in the organization, now having to interact daily, right? So creating that visibility is incredibly key. And how do we do that? Well, compliance reports off the bat, of course, but being able to provide those visuals that are digestible So that way, whether you're talking to security, whether you're talking to DevOps, or even the stakeholders, as Tony has mentioned before, right? Everyone can digest what they're seeing and they're comfortable with this shift left. So I'm going to pause right there, and then we're going to open it up for Q&A. And I see some questions here. So Tony, I think these are geared for you, so get ready. Number one, I think during the beginning of the conversation, we was asked, how is Magalix different from GitOps? So maybe you want to dive into that?
Sure. So GitOps is more of like to me, a more rapid delivery model, right? But there's no, I mean, where does the security, right? You need to implement security there. So I think it could, I don't necessarily think it solves it because you're still missing a security piece. But if you had security, a security, I guess, step in your GitOps flow, then sure, it would work. But I wouldn't necessarily say that it solves the security challenge, if that makes sense, right? So like in your case, if there's GitOps, you know, if you added a policy in there that checks for it, sure, right? That would, you know, that should take care of it from that perspective. Hopefully that answers your question.
Thank you, Tony. I think that does a good job. We got another one here. Can you give us examples of built-in policies that Magalix provides out of the box?
Yeah, to a certain extent I can, right? We provide policies that are commensurate and more with the community has offer. For example, you know, making sure things don't run as root, making sure you're setting limits and resources, limits and requests for your CPU and memory. But one thing that we also offer is we also offer templated policies, which is a little bit different. So things like anti-affinity, affinity, setting different ranges for certain values. So not just making sure that you have, you know, CPU limits and requests in place, but making sure they're like within a certain range of things, right? We also add things like custom labels, you know, annotations. And so we also allow you to write your own policies too. We are OPA, I guess you would say, compatible. And so if you wanted to write your own Rego policy, you absolutely can.
Phenomenal. And I think just to piggyback off of that one, what workflows or team integrations do you offer? I think that's a great question.
Sure. And so in terms of workflow, I think if you're asking about you know, CI and CD pipelines, then the way that it works is we are agnostic, right, to any of these tools. And so basically what I would do if I were creating this pipeline, and how does Magalix come in, you know, come into play here? Once the build process is happening, right, you add a security scan check. We have a webhook that you can talk to, or we have an API, excuse me, webhook that you can talk to that basically checks for these violations that you set. And then, you know, it gives feedback to the developer. And those same policies, again, go into deploy time and build time, and runtime. So, and we also have notifications, right, that you can plug into whatever system, Slack, Jira, you know, PagerDuty. And so we have these reusable policies that you can use that integrate with your existing workflows. So in terms of what workflows do we offer, I don't think we offer a workflow per se, but like Dan said, we're complementary to whatever you're using because, you know, we're not opinionated. If you wanted to use Circle CI and then you know, feel free to use it, right? We could help it with you, help you do that.
Great. I think that does a good job answering that. I got a couple more here for you, Tony. How do you get data from Kubernetes?
Sure. So we have an agent that you deploy, and that speaks with the Kubernetes API. And then once you install that agent, obviously there's some RBAC stuff that goes on behind the scenes to make sure we have access only to the things that we need. But once we collect these metrics, then you know, the agent is like the proxy, and then we give it. And then once you go into our console, you can see all the things that we're collecting in kind of a single pane of glass.
Right on. And then, you know, I know we're not doing a demo per se, but can you just talk us through and shed some light on some of the reports that Magalix provides?
Yeah, absolutely. So we provide reports from, since we're also cluster agnostic, right? We can We could have one policy that applies to multiple clusters and multiple different clouds, even on-prem, right? So we could give you a report based on the type of cluster that you have, location, the type of policy that's been violated. We have categories and severities. So you can filter by that. We could give you reports by region and even also by regulation. So maybe a HIPAA or a SOC 2, you can filter down even to that level and see that.
100%. A couple more for you here, Tony.
Mm-hmm.
Another one just came in. Are you compatible with Open Policy Agent? I think this is a great one.
Yeah.
You help migrating from OPA?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 100% compatible OPA. You can throw those Rego rules into our policy engine and they'll work. In terms of migration, there might be a little bit of tweaking because we expect certain values, but it might be something as simple as copy and paste and copy and paste into our product, and search and replace a couple items in there. But it should be very, very straightforward and almost seamless.
Okay, and then the last two questions here, and we can wrap it up. This one might be a little bit difficult because I think this could be a laundry list of integrations, but what integrations do you provide?
Sure, and so we're from the build and the deploy time standpoint, pretty much anything that supports outbound internet access, right, and in a command line, right? So a shell script, anything in your CI/CD, probably your console, right? So from that aspect, as long as you can support that, we can integrate with you. Now on the tail end, in terms of the deploy time, we have integrations with Jira, Slack, PagerDuty, just to name a few. It's all, our events are JSON, so you could even take the JSON and route it and refer to your own custom system, whether that's a SIEM system or you have some other custom thing going on.
Right, right. And then finally, how is Magilix different from a runtime security, such as like intrusion detection?
Yeah, so I think intrusion detection are things like, SQL injection, DDoS. I think they're different in that regard. I always thought of network intrusion detection more in line with networking. I could be wrong. It's been a while since I've been in on that side of things. But this is more of like, okay, if somebody broke through the firewall, well, let's take a step back here, right? Whoever configured the firewall, right? If there are certain rules that need to be in place, how do you ensure and govern that every time a new, load balancer or edge router is put in place, that it has a certain amount of rules? So I think in terms of how is it different, one is from a governance standpoint. That's one angle, and the other is more like I'm getting attacked, right? Policy as code is not necessarily a real-time an attack mitigation, I guess, solution. It's more about prevention and detection as opposed to mitigation. I hope that answers your question.
Okay. One last one. What's again, Tony, without doing the demo, what's a sample policy out of the box? Could you just talk us through one of those?
Sure. A sample policy, for example, is, I'll give you a different one. Let's say you have an approved container registry that you only want people to pull from. You can set that up. That's a sample one. We have over 40 samples right now, over 20 templates. And so, I don't think we have enough time to go through each one individually.
Yeah.
But let me say this again. We're very comparable to what's out in the community today. If you see in the community, it's in the product.
I think for whoever asked that question, please reach out, schedule a demo. We'd be happy to talk through that in more depth. And then finally, I got one last one that came through. Where do we, what clouds do we work with? Well, essentially the big three, DigitalOcean. We do work on premise as well. Again, it's not our job to dictate your infrastructure. We want to play well with your environment. So at the moment, we support all the major players and some of the minor ones as well. And happy to share a list with everyone after the call, if need be, right? Just ping me. My email is included on the deck. But with that being said, Tony, I think we'll close it off for questions. And then just go to the last slide here. I want to thank everyone for your time. Appreciate it. And please join us for our next session. We're going to be sitting down with HSBC Bank, February 18th, coming up here, just a few weeks. HSBC, our friend there, Scott Surovich, he's the lead global container engineer. He's becoming an amazing friend, and he's been a great partner for us and really guiding us in how we're approaching what we do at Magalix and working with banks and fintechs. Scott's going to be talking about really his journey, the journey that's taken 3 years to successfully quote unquote shift left. HSBC's got Kubernetes distros in all clouds, and how they adopted OPA, and really how they look at vendors, right? I think this is incredibly important because there's a lot of noise out there, and we're going to be cutting through that. So please join us on our next session. Thank you for today. We'll get you an email for that next one. And if there's any other questions, or you guys would like a deeper dive of the product, please shoot me an email. My name is daniel.tirani@magalix.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.